The soft click of her heels echoed against the marble floor as Evelyn stepped into the restaurant. The place was dimly lit, casting golden hues over polished tables and expensive wine glasses. She wasn't supposed to be here, not tonight at least. Her husband, Daniel, had kissed her goodbye just this morning, suitcase in hand, his voice warm with promises. "I'll call you when I land. Don't stay up too late, sweetheart." A business trip, he had said. 3 days in another city, meetings from morning to night. And yet, there he was. Not miles away in some hotel, exhausted from back-to-back meetings, but right here, in the very heart of town, sitting across from a woman with long, dark hair. Their hands intertwined across the table. Their smiles intimate. A lesser woman might have gasped, might have cried, might have turned on her heel and fled. But Evelyn was not a lesser woman. She walked straight up to the table, her heart steady, her expression unreadable. Then, in the softest, most polite voice, she asked, "How's your trip going?" For a moment, silence swallowed the table. Daniel's fingers stiffened around the other woman's hand, his expression frozen somewhere between horror and disbelief. He blinked, as if hoping Evelyn was some cruel hallucination conjured by guilt. But she was real. Too real. The woman across from him, young, beautiful, oblivious, turned her head with curious eyes. "Daniel? Who is she?" Evelyn smiled. A slow, patient smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm just his wife." The girl's face strained of color. She snatched her hand away from Daniel's as though burned, but Evelyn didn't spare her a second glance. Her focus was on her husband, her lying husband, whose jaw had clenched so tightly she swore she could hear his teeth grinding. "Eve," he started, his voice low, warning. "Let's not do this here." Evelyn tilted her head. "Do what, darling?" "I was just wondering how your business trip was going." The edge in her voice was subtle, but Daniel flinched. The carefully woven illusion of his double life was unraveling strand by strand, right here, in front of an audience. People at nearby tables had begun to notice. Conversations hushed. The weight of quiet judgment settled over the scene like a thick fog. Evelyn placed a manicured hand on the table and leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. "You didn't even have the decency to go out of town?" She chuckled, shaking her head. "You could have at least tried to lie better." Daniel exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Eve, let's just—" "No," she straightened, smoothing the invisible wrinkles on her dress. "You made your choice, Daniel. I just wanted to see it for myself." And with that, she turned on her heel, walking away as if none of it had ever mattered. As if he had never mattered. She would not cry. Not here. Not now. But as she stepped out into the cool night air, she knew one thing for certain. Daniel's business trip had just come to an end. And so had their marriage. Evelyn walked out of the restaurant with her head high and her heart racing. The cool night air felt sharp against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the icy rage simmering inside her. She didn't cry. Not yet. Not when she still had things to do. Sliding into her car, she took a slow breath and reached for her phone. No desperate calls, no pleading texts. Daniel would expect that. Instead, she pulled up her lawyer's contact. "Evelyn, I need to discuss filing for divorce. Call me first thing in the morning." She hit send. No hesitation. Because Evelyn wasn't the type of woman to beg. By the time she got home, the house felt different. Colder. Emptier. Not for long. She moved with quiet precision, opening drawers, cabinets, and files, gathering everything that mattered. Bank statements. Property deeds. Every asset they shared. Daniel had underestimated her. He probably thought she would break down, beg for an explanation, or worse, forgive him. She smirked. He had no idea what was coming. As she sorted through documents, a ding sounded from her phone. A message from Daniel. "Daniel. Eve, let's talk. Please." "I can explain." "Explain?" Evelyn nearly laughed. She could still see him sitting in that dimly lit restaurant, his fingers tangled with another woman's. She typed back only 2 words. "Evelyn, save it." Then, for good measure, she forwarded his message to her lawyer. She had no interest in explanations, only consequences. The next morning, Daniel came home, probably expecting a fight. Instead, he found Evelyn sitting calmly at the kitchen table, sipping coffee. Next to her was a neatly stacked pile of papers. "What is this?" he asked, warily eyeing the stack. She gestured lazily. "Divorce papers." His face paled. "Eve, don't do this. Let's talk." She tilted her head, feigning thoughtfulness. "You know, Daniel, I thought about it." She took another sip of coffee. "Then I remembered I don't waste time on liars." He opened his mouth, but she cut him off. "Oh, and before you even think of playing the 'this was a mistake' card," she slid a folder toward him. "Bank records. Property deeds. Every little financial secret you thought I wasn't paying attention to." Daniel swallowed hard. Evelyn smiled sweetly. "You can keep your little business trips. I'll be keeping the house." As she walked out of her home, she finally let herself feel something. Not heartbreak. Not regret. Freedom. And it looked damn good on her. Evelyn didn't look back as she left the house, the weight of the past lifting off her shoulders with each step. She had spent years playing the devoted wife, trusting a man who had been living a double life. But now she was free. Sliding into her car, she drove to the law firm downtown. By the time she arrived, her attorney, Lauren Hayes, was already waiting with a fresh cup of coffee and a knowing smirk. "I have to say," Lauren said, flipping through the documents Evelyn had sent the night before, "I've seen a lot of cheating husbands, but yours was sloppy." Evelyn let out a short, humorless laugh. "He was arrogant enough to think I'd never find out, that I'd never do anything about it." Lauren leaned back in her chair. "Well, he's in for a surprise. With the evidence you provided, financial records, proof of infidelity, and the fact that you are the primary owner of your house, this divorce is going to be a clean sweep in your favor." Evelyn met her lawyer's gaze, her voice steady. "I don't just want to leave, Lauren. I want him to lose." Lauren grinned. "Oh, trust me. By the time we're done, Daniel will regret ever thinking he could lie to you." Evelyn exhaled, finally feeling in control for the first time in a long time. She wasn't going to waste another second crying over a man who had already moved on before she even knew the marriage was over. She had bigger things to focus on. 1 month later, Daniel sat in the conference room across from Evelyn, his usually confident demeanor nowhere to be found. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his suit slightly disheveled. Evelyn, on the other hand, was radiant. Dressed in an elegant cream-colored suit, she exuded grace and power. She didn't need to argue, didn't need to plead. Her lawyer was handling everything. Lauren slid a final document across the table. "This agreement ensures Evelyn retains full ownership of the house and 60% of the remaining assets." She smiled, sharp as a knife. "Unless, of course, you'd rather take this to court, where the evidence of your infidelity will be on full display?" Daniel clenched his jaw, but said nothing. Evelyn watched him carefully. A month ago, she might have wanted to scream, to demand why. But now? He was just another lesson learned. With a heavy sigh, Daniel finally signed the papers. Evelyn stood, collecting her purse. "Goodbye, Daniel." He looked up at her, regret flickering in his eyes. "Eve, But she was already walking away. This time for good. Epilogue. 6 months later. The sun was setting over the city as Evelyn sat at an upscale rooftop lounge, a glass of wine in hand. She had just signed a new business deal, one that would set her up for a future where she no longer had to rely on anyone else. "Celebrating something?" a deep voice asked. She turned to find a strikingly handsome man watching her, his smirk teasing but respectful. Evelyn smiled. "You could say that." He gestured toward the empty seat beside her. "Mind if I join?" She thought about it for a second before nodding. Because this was her new beginning. And she wasn't looking back. Evelyn smirked as the man took the seat beside her. He was tall, confident, and effortlessly charming, but she had learned not to trust appearances. "Name?" she asked, swirling the wine in her glass. He chuckled. "Straight to business?" I like that. Extending a hand, he said, Adrian Black. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Black, huh? Sounds dangerous. Adrian's lips curved into a smirk. Only if you're on the wrong side of me. She shook his hand, her grip firm. Evelyn Carter. His gaze flickered with recognition, and she knew why. Her divorce had made headlines in certain business and social circles. Betrayed wife walks away with the house, the money, and the last laugh. I've heard of you, Adrian admitted, leaning back in his chair. The woman who turned a scandal into a power move. Evelyn tilted her head. That's one way to put it. Adrian's eyes glinted with interest. And what's the next move for Evelyn Carter? She took a slow sip of her wine before answering. Building something of my own. She had spent years supporting Daniel's ambitions, playing the perfect wife, while he climbed the corporate ladder. No more. Now it was her turn. Adrian nodded, seemingly impressed. Let me guess, business? Evelyn gave him a knowing smile. Something like that. Before she could say more, her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced down, her smirk widening. Daniel, we need to talk. Please, Eve. She didn't even bother responding. Instead, she turned her attention back to Adrian. So, tell me, Mr. Black, what's your business? Adrian clinked his glass against hers. Let's just say I have a talent for turning opportunities into something very profitable. Evelyn met his gaze, intrigued. Maybe, just maybe, she had found her next move. And this time, she was playing to win. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, tapping her manicured nails against the glass. Adrian Black intrigued her, but she wasn't the type to be easily impressed anymore. Still, she was curious. You turn opportunities into profit? She mused, watching him over the rim of her wine glass. That's a very polished way of saying you're a businessman. Or a con artist. Adrian chuckled, his eyes glinting with amusement. I prefer strategist. Evelyn smirked. Strategist, huh? And what exactly do you strategize? He took a sip of his drink before answering. Investments. Mergers. Takeovers. He leaned in slightly, voice smooth, helping people get what they deserve. The way he said it sent a delicious thrill down her spine. There was something about him. Dangerous, calculated, yet completely in control. Exactly the kind of person she needed in her life right now. You seem like a woman who knows what she wants, Adrian continued. So tell me, Evelyn, do you want revenge or success? Evelyn smiled, slow and deliberate. Why not both? Adrian's smirk deepened. Now that's a woman I'd like to work with. 1 week later, Evelyn sat in her newly rented office, reviewing documents spread out in front of her. She had spent the past few days carefully laying the foundation for her next move, starting her own firm. It was small for now, but not for long. With Adrian's connections and her business acumen, she was already pulling strings behind the scenes. Companies Daniel had once relied on were suddenly considering other partnerships. Investors were starting to second-guess their loyalty. And the best part? Daniel had no idea she was the one behind it. Until now. Her phone buzzed. Daniel, Evelyn, I know you're behind this. We need to talk. She smirked, tossing the phone onto her desk without replying. She had spent years playing the role of the devoted wife, the supportive partner in the shadows of his success. Now, it was her time to shine. And if Daniel thought he could stop her, he was about to learn just how ruthless she could be. Evelyn tapped her fingers on her desk, eyes flicking over the financial reports in front of her. Daniel's company had been stable for years, thriving under the illusion that nothing could shake it. Too bad for him, she was the earthquake. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Adrian strolled in, dressed in his usual sharp suit, a smirk playing on his lips. Got news for you, he said, tossing a file onto her desk. Evelyn picked it up, skimming through the pages. Her lips curled in satisfaction. He's losing investors. Adrian nodded, settling into the chair across from her. Word is spreading fast. People don't trust a man who lets his personal life leak into business. He shot her a knowing look, especially when that personal life involves screwing over the wrong woman. She chuckled. Good. Let him feel the pressure. Adrian tilted his head, watching her closely. You enjoy this, don't you? Evelyn met his gaze, unbothered. He made me feel small, made me believe I needed him to succeed. She tossed the file onto the desk. Now, he gets to watch as I take everything he thought was his. Adrian's smirk deepened. Remind me never to get on your bad side. She leaned forward slightly. Smart man. He chuckled, a slow, rich sound that sent a flicker of heat through her. I do my best. The moment stretched between them, charged with something neither of them acknowledged. Yet. Then her phone buzzed. Daniel again. Daniel, we need to talk.
Now.
Evelyn sighed, but this time, she picked up. Finally, Daniel's voice came through the line, strained with frustration. You're sabotaging my company. She twirled a pen between her fingers. Oh, Daniel, you're giving me way too much credit. A pause. Evelyn. She cut him off, her voice smooth and sharp. I warned you. Silence. Then, quietly, he said, I made a mistake. Evelyn laughed, genuinely amused. Oh, sweetheart, we both know it's too late for that. And with that, she hung up. Adrian raised a brow. Think he'll back down? She smiled, slow and dangerous. Not a chance.
Good.
This was only the beginning. Evelyn exhaled slowly, letting the thrill of power settle in her chest. She had spent years being the woman in the background, the supportive wife who smiled at charity galas and played the role of the perfect partner.
Now?
She was the one pulling the strings. And yet, she glanced at Adrian, his dark eyes studying her with that ever-present smirk. He was always so calm, so collected, like he knew exactly what move she'd make next. Something on your mind? He asked, leaning back in his chair. Evelyn tilted her head. I was just wondering, she tapped her fingers on the desk. Why are you helping me? Adrian's smirk didn't falter, but there was something in his gaze, something unreadable. I told you. I help people get what they deserve. That's not an answer. He let out a low chuckle. All right then. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Maybe I like watching a woman take back what's hers. Evelyn arched a brow. That's all. His gaze flickered to her lips for half a second before meeting her eyes again. Not quite. A slow warmth spread through her, a different kind of thrill. She wasn't naive, she knew attraction when she saw it. But Adrian was a man who thrived in control, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't sure who was playing the game. You think you have me figured out, she mused. Adrian's lips curved slightly. Not yet. His voice dropped just a bit lower. But I'd like to. The air between them grew charged, the tension simmering just beneath the surface. Evelyn leaned in slightly, her voice teasing. Careful, Adrian. You don't want to end up on my bad side. His smirk deepened. Oh, sweetheart, he murmured, his voice like silk. I think I'd like all your sides. A thrill ran down her spine, but before she could reply, her assistant knocked on the door, breaking the moment. Evelyn straightened, clearing her throat as she called, Come in. The moment was gone, but the energy still lingered. As Adrian stood to leave, he paused by her desk, his fingers lightly brushing hers as he picked up his phone. Dinner tomorrow? Evelyn met his gaze, her heart beating just a little too fast. A challenge.
A dare.
A temptation. She smiled. Make it somewhere expensive. He grinned. Done. And with that, he was gone, leaving her with the unsettling realization that for the first time in a long time, she wanted to take a risk. Evelyn stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate gold necklace resting against her collarbone. Her dress, sleek, black, and effortlessly elegant, hugged her in all the right places. Not too flashy, not too modest. Just enough to make Adrian notice. She wasn't sure why she cared. It's just business. That's what she told herself. But deep down, she knew it wasn't. When Adrian had invited her to dinner, it hadn't been framed as a date. But the way he looked at her, the way his voice dipped just slightly when he spoke, it was something. And she wasn't entirely sure she wanted to stop it. Adrian was already waiting when she arrived, sitting in a private booth with a glass of whiskey in hand. He looked effortlessly put together, tailored suit, open collar, and that ever-present smirk. When he saw her, he stood, his eyes dragging over her in a way that sent a slow heat curling through her stomach. "You clean up nice," he murmured, holding out a chair for her. Evelyn arched a brow. "I always do." He chuckled, amused. "Fair enough." As she settled in, a waiter appeared, pouring her a glass of wine before disappearing again. Adrian leaned back, watching her. "Tell me, Evelyn, do you ever slow down?" She took a sip of her drink, considering. "I don't have time to slow down." He tilted his head slightly. "Because of Daniel?" Evelyn scoffed. "Because I wasted years on a man who didn't deserve me. I won't make that mistake again." Adrian studied her for a moment before nodding. "Good." Something about his tone made her pause. "You approve?" His lips twitched. "I respect it." He leaned forward slightly. "A woman who knows her worth? That's dangerous." Evelyn smirked. "You like danger, Adrian?" His gaze darkened just a bit. "I like you." The words were simple, direct, yet they sent a sharp thrill through her. She wasn't used to men like Adrian. Men who didn't play games with flowery words or empty promises. She took another sip of wine, her pulse quickening. "Careful," she murmured. "You don't know what you're getting into." Adrian chuckled, his voice smooth as silk. "I think I do." The moment stretched between them, charged with an unspoken tension. Then, "Evelyn." Her entire body went rigid at the sound of his voice. She turned slowly, her stomach twisting as she met Daniel's stunned gaze. He stood a few feet away, his expression a mix of shock and something else, something almost desperate. Evelyn exhaled slowly, forcing herself to stay calm. She wasn't the woman who cowered anymore. She lifted her glass, her smirk razor-sharp. "Daniel," she said smoothly. "Enjoying your business trip?" Adrian chuckled under his breath, but his eyes were sharp, assessing the situation. Daniel swallowed hard, glancing between them. "We need to talk." Evelyn tilted her head. "We really don't." Adrian leaned back, watching Daniel with a lazy sort of amusement. "You heard the lady." Daniel's jaw clenched. "This isn't funny, Evelyn." "No," she agreed. "It's not. But watching you squirm? That's entertaining." Daniel exhaled sharply, frustration flickering in his eyes. "Evelyn, please." For a brief moment, she saw something vulnerable there. A part of him that maybe, just maybe, regretted everything. But regret wasn't enough. Not anymore. She stood, smoothing her dress. "Daniel, let me make this clear." She met his gaze, her voice steady. "You don't own me anymore. You don't get to demand my time. And you sure as hell don't get a say in who I have dinner with." Daniel swallowed hard. "Evelyn." "Goodbye, Daniel." She turned back to Adrian, who was watching her with something like admiration. Adrian smirked, rising to his feet. "Shall we?" Evelyn looped her arm through his, letting him lead her toward the exit. As they stepped outside, Adrian glanced at her. "That was fun." She exhaled, shaking off the last remnants of her past. "You have no idea." Adrian chuckled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Let's make a habit of it." Evelyn smiled, warmth spreading through her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she would. Evelyn let the cool night air settle over her as she stepped onto the sidewalk, Adrian's arms still linked with hers. The tension from Daniel's unexpected appearance was still there, but instead of anger or frustration, she felt something else, satisfaction. She had walked away. Not just physically, but emotionally. And for the first time in years, Daniel was the one left behind. Adrian led her toward his car, but instead of opening the door, he turned to her. "You all right?" Evelyn smirked. "You think Daniel's little plea rattled me?" He studied her, amusement flickering in his dark eyes. "Not at all. But I do think he's desperate. And desperate men do stupid things." Evelyn exhaled slowly, her gaze drifting to the city lights. "He'll try again." Adrian nodded. "Probably." Then, stepping closer, he added, "But you don't care, do you?" She looked up at him, the space between them shrinking. "No," she said softly. "I don't." His gaze dipped to her lips before returning to her eyes. Good. The warmth in his voice sent a shiver down her spine. There was something about Adrian, his presence, his unwavering confidence, that made her pulse quicken. And then, before she could second-guess it, she closed the distance between them. Their lips met in a slow, deliberate kiss. Adrian didn't rush. He let her set the pace, his hands resting lightly on her waist. It wasn't the kind of kiss filled with desperation. No, this was something else. Something deeper. When she finally pulled away, Adrian's smirk had returned, but there was something softer beneath it. Well, he murmured, I wasn't expecting that. Evelyn arched a brow. Disappointed. He chuckled. Not even a little. She let herself smile. It wasn't just about Adrian, it was about her. About choosing what she wanted for the first time in a long time.
And she wanted this.
Wanted him. As she slipped into the car, she realized something else. Daniel wasn't her problem anymore. But that didn't mean he was done being hers. Evelyn woke up to the golden morning light filtering through her penthouse window, stretching lazily beneath the silk sheets. The scent of coffee drifted through the air, and she knew Adrian was already up. A small smile tugged at her lips. Last night had been something. Not just the kiss, not just the quiet, stolen moments between them. It was the way Adrian looked at her, like she was a force to be reckoned with. Like he wasn't afraid of her sharp edges. And for once, she didn't feel the need to hide them. She slipped out of bed, pulling on a robe before heading toward the kitchen. Sure enough, Adrian stood by the counter, dressed in nothing but his slacks, a steaming cup in hand. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, smirking. Morning trouble. Evelyn rolled her eyes, accepting the coffee he handed her. You say that like it's a bad thing. Adrian chuckled, leaning against the counter. Never said it was. She took a sip, watching him. So, what's next? He arched a brow. For breakfast or for us? She smirked. Both. He set his cup down and stepped closer, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Breakfast? I was thinking something simple. His fingers trailed lightly down her arm. As for us? He leaned in, his lips just a breath away. That depends. Do you want this to be more than just business? Evelyn exhaled slowly, searching his gaze. She had spent so long guarding her heart, building walls so high that even she had forgotten what it felt like to want again. But with Adrian, it felt effortless. She reached up, threading her fingers through his hair as she whispered, I think we both know the answer to that. He smiled against her lips before capturing them in a deep, lingering kiss. As the sun bathed them in its warm glow, Evelyn realized something. She had spent years defining herself by a man who never deserved her. Now, she was finally choosing herself. And this time, she wasn't looking back. Evelyn stepped out of the sleek black car, her heels clicking against the pavement as she adjusted the cuffs of her designer blazer. The Grand Hotel before her buzzed with high-profile guests, businessmen, and socialites, all here for the biggest corporate gala of the year. But Evelyn wasn't just another guest. She was here as the CEO of her own empire. A year ago, she had walked away from Daniel and everything that had once defined her. Now, she was the one people whispered about in admiration. The woman who had taken control of her destiny. As she strode through the gilded doors, heads turned. And then, Evelyn. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. Daniel. She glanced over her shoulder, her expression unreadable. Daniel. He looked the same, sharp suit, controlled demeanor, but there was something else in his eyes now. Regret. You've done well for yourself, he admitted. She smirked. I have. His jaw tightened. He hesitated. I made a mistake. Evelyn tilted her head, amusement dancing in her eyes. Which one? Lying? Cheating? Or assuming I'd wait around for you? Daniel exhaled, running a hand through his hair. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For a fleeting second, the woman she used to be might have cared. But Evelyn wasn't her anymore. She smiled, but it wasn't one of longing, it was one of victory. Apology accepted. Now, if you'll excuse me. A strong arm slid around her waist, pulling her close. Adrian. Dressed in an impeccable black suit, his presence was effortlessly commanding. He pressed a brief kiss to her temple, his smirk playful but possessive as he glanced at Daniel. "Something wrong?" Adrian asked smoothly. Daniel swallowed, his gaze darting between them. "No," he murmured. "Nothing at all." Evelyn laced her fingers with Adrian's, turning her attention back to the grand event. As they walked away, she didn't look back. She had finally won. And she was exactly where she was meant to be.